Who were the top 5 most feared warriors of the medieval world? Who were the real-life Game of Thrones characters? The medieval period, a time of knights, castles, and epic battles, has left an indelible mark on history. It was an era where the line between myth and reality often blurred, giving rise to legendary warriors whose names still echo through the annals of time. These men were not just leaders or soldiers. They were symbols of power, fear, and heroism. Let's explore the lives of the 5 most feared warriors of the medieval world, drawing parallels between their real-life exploits and the fictional characters of modern popular culture, particularly from the famous Game of Thrones series. These warriors were the embodiment of strength, strategy, and ruthlessness, shaping the course of history through their actions on and off the battlefield. William Wallace, a name that conjures images of rebellion and resistance, was one of Scotland's most revered and feared warriors. Born in the late 13th century, Wallace rose to prominence during the Wars of Scottish Independence, leading his people in a valiant struggle against the English occupation. His life and legacy have been immortalized in both historical records and popular culture, most famously in the film Braveheart. Wallace's early life is shrouded in mystery, but by 1297, he had become a significant figure in the Scottish resistance. His most famous victory came at the Battle of Stirling Bridge, where his innovative tactics allowed a smaller Scottish force to defeat a much larger English army. Wallace's use of the terrain, along with his ability to inspire his men, showcased his military genius and made him a symbol of Scottish defiance. However, Wallace's fearsome reputation was not only due to his victories. His brutal methods in warfare, particularly against those who betrayed Scotland, earned him a fearsome reputation. Wallace's campaign was characterized by a relentless drive to free Scotland, often at the cost of severe reprisals against English forces and collaborators. His capture and subsequent execution only solidified his status as a martyr for Scottish independence. In the world of Game of Thrones, Wallace's character is reminiscent of Robb Stark, the King in the North. Both were young, charismatic leaders who rose to power during times of great turmoil, leading rebellions against a dominant force. Like Stark, Wallace faced betrayal and a tragic end, but his legacy lived on, inspiring future generations to continue the fight for freedom. Richard I of England, known as Richard the Lionheart, was one of the most formidable warriors of the medieval period. Born in 1157, Richard was the 3rd son of King Henry II of England and Eleanor of Aquitaine. Despite being the 3rd in line, Richard's military prowess and leadership skills quickly set him apart, and he became one of the most feared and respected figures of his time. Richard's reputation as a warrior was cemented during the Third Crusade, 1189 to 1192, where he led Christian forces against the Muslim leader Saladin. Richard's courage and tactical acumen were evident in battles such as the Siege of Acre and the Battle of Arsuf, where he achieved significant victories despite facing formidable odds. His ability to inspire his men and his relentless pursuit of victory made him a legendary figure in both Christian and Muslim worlds. However, Richard's ferocity in battle was matched by his ruthlessness. His decision to execute over 2,700 Muslim prisoners at Acre sent shockwaves through both camps, demonstrating his willingness to use terror as a weapon. Richard's reputation as the Lionheart was well-earned, symbolizing his bravery, strength, and at times, brutal approach to warfare. In Game of Thrones, Richard the Lionheart could be likened to Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer. Both were renowned for their martial prowess and had a complex relationship with honor and duty. Jaime's actions, like Richard's, were often driven by a sense of obligation, but also by a fierce desire to protect those he cared about, even if it meant committing morally questionable acts. Though not European, Genghis Khan's impact on the medieval world was so profound that he cannot be excluded from any discussion of the era's most feared warriors. Born as Temujin in 1162, Genghis Khan would go on to found the Mongol Empire, the largest contiguous empire in history. His military campaigns were marked by unparalleled brutality and efficiency, earning him a reputation as one of the most feared conquerors in history. Genghis Khan's rise to power was marked by his ability to unite the fractious Mongol tribes under his leadership. His military tactics, which included psychological warfare, the use of speed and mobility, and the brutal treatment of enemies, allowed him to conquer vast territories across Asia and into Europe. Cities that resisted his armies were often razed to the ground, their populations slaughtered or enslaved. The terror that Genghis Khan inspired was not limited to his enemies. Even his own generals and soldiers knew that failure could result in severe punishment. His reputation for mercilessness ensured that many cities surrendered without a fight, preferring to pay tribute rather than face annihilation. In the Game of Thrones universe, Genghis Khan bears similarities to Khal Drogo, the leader of the Dothraki. Both were leaders of nomadic warriors who valued strength above all else, and were known for their fierce and often brutal tactics in battle. Like Genghis Khan, Drogo was a figure of immense power and fear, whose influence extended far beyond his immediate followers. Vlad III, Prince of Wallachia, is better known by his epithet, Vlad the Impaler, a name that strikes fear into the hearts of those who hear it. Born in 1431, Vlad's reign in Wallachia was marked by a ruthless and bloody defense of his territory against the encroaching Ottoman Empire. His reputation for cruelty and his method of impaling his enemies on stakes have become the stuff of legend, contributing to the myth of Count Dracula. Vlad's military campaigns were driven by his desire to protect Wallachia from the Ottomans and to maintain his power against internal rivals. His use of terror as a weapon was unparalleled, and his preferred method of execution, impaling, was intended to send a clear message to his enemies. Vlad's forces would leave forests of impaled bodies along the borders of his territory, a gruesome warning to those who might consider invasion. Despite his brutal methods, Vlad was seen by some as a hero, particularly in Romania, where he is celebrated for his resistance against the Ottomans. His fearsome reputation, however, ensured that his name would be remembered throughout history, both as a ruthless leader and as the inspiration for Bram Stoker's Dracula. In Game of Thrones, Vlad the Impaler could be compared to Ramsay Bolton, a character known for his sadistic tendencies and brutal treatment of enemies and allies alike. Like Vlad, Ramsay used fear as a weapon, and his acts of cruelty were designed to break the will of those who opposed him. Both figures are terrifying in their own right, embodying the darker aspects of human nature. While the previous entries on this list are often remembered for their brutality, Saladin, the Sultan of Egypt and Syria, is remembered as one of the most chivalrous and respected warriors of the medieval period. Born in 1137, Saladin rose to prominence during the Crusades, where he became the primary Muslim leader opposing the European Crusaders. Saladin's most famous victory came at the Battle of Hattin in 1187, where he decisively defeated the Crusader forces, leading to the Muslim recapture of Jerusalem. Despite his victories, Saladin was known for his generosity and sense of honor. His treatment of prisoners and his respect for his enemies, particularly Richard the Lionheart, earned him admiration even from his adversaries. Saladin's leadership was characterized by a sense of duty to his people and to Islam. He was a skilled diplomat as well as a warrior, able to unite the often fractious Muslim forces under his command. His ability to inspire loyalty and his reputation for fairness made him a beloved figure in the Muslim world and a respected one in the Christian West. In Game of Thrones, Saladin can be likened to characters such as Ser Barristan Selmy or Jon Snow, who embody the ideals of honor and chivalry. Like Saladin, these characters are respected by both friends and foes for their sense of justice and their commitment to doing what is right, even in the face of overwhelming odds. The warriors discussed in this essay were more than just skilled fighters. They were leaders, strategists, and symbols of their respective cultures. Their legacies have endured through the centuries, not only because of their military achievements, but also because of the way they shaped the world around them. In many ways, these real-life figures have become the prototypes for the fictional characters we see in modern popular culture, from Game of Thrones to other medieval-inspired stories. William Wallace, Richard the Lionheart, Genghis Khan, Vlad the Impaler, and Saladin each represent different aspects of what it meant to be a warrior in the medieval world. Whether through their tactical genius, their ability to inspire fear, or their sense of honor, these men left a lasting impact on history. They were the real-life Kingslayers, Khalasars, and Lords of Winterfell, whose stories continue to captivate and inspire. As we look back on the medieval period, it is clear that the influence of these warriors extends beyond their immediate historical context. They have become archetypes of power, bravery, and ruthlessness, whose stories are retold in various forms across different cultures and mediums. The tales of their conquests, struggles, and legacies offer us insights into the complexities of leadership, the nature of warfare, and the human condition itself. These warriors also illustrate the thin line between heroism and tyranny, between respect and fear. For some, like Saladin, their legacy is one of noble resistance and chivalry, remembered for their honor even in the face of conflict. For others, like Vlad the Impaler, their notoriety is rooted in the terror they inspired, a reminder of the darker aspects of power and control. In modern popular culture, particularly in Game of Thrones, we see these archetypes brought to life in characters who mirror the complexities of these medieval figures. The show's success is due in part to its ability to draw on historical precedents, creating characters who are both fantastical and deeply grounded in the realities of human nature. The brutal tactics of Ramsay Bolton, the honor-bound actions of Jon Snow, the strategic brilliance of Tywin Lannister, all have their roots in the real lives of medieval warriors. The continued fascination with these figures reflects our enduring interest in the medieval period as a time of larger-than-life characters and epic narratives. Whether they are celebrated as heroes or reviled as villains, the warriors of the medieval world captivate us because they embody the extremes of human experience. They remind us of the potential for both greatness and cruelty within us all. Moreover, the study of these figures helps us understand the historical processes that shaped the world we live in today. The actions of Genghis Khan, for example, had a profound impact on the development of trade routes, cultural exchanges, and political boundaries that are still relevant in modern geopolitics. Similarly, the conflicts between Richard the Lionheart and Saladin during the Crusades continue to influence the relationship between the Western and Islamic worlds. The stories of William Wallace and Vlad the Impaler also highlight the enduring themes of resistance and rebellion, showing how individuals can become symbols of national identity and cultural pride. Wallace's struggle for Scottish independence and Vlad's defense against Ottoman encroachment are examples of how warfare can be both a personal and collective endeavor, shaping the destiny of entire nations. In conclusion, the most feared warriors of the medieval world were more than just military leaders. They were icons of their time, whose legacies have transcended history. By examining their lives and deeds, we gain not only a deeper understanding of the medieval period, but also a greater appreciation for the complex interplay between power, fear, and heroism. These warriors, both real and fictional, continue to inspire and caution us, serving as reminders of the heights of glory and the depths of brutality that human beings are capable of achieving. Thanks for listening. Like and comment. And please subscribe, as that will help us get more videos out to those interested in the Middle Ages. See you next time on Medieval Chronicles 1066. Stay curious. Do you know why the Battle of Bosworth, fought on August 22nd, 1485, marked a pivotal moment in English history? Did it really bring an end to the Wars of the Roses? And what do we know about the rise of the Tudor dynasty? Today we provide a comprehensive analysis of the battle, exploring the political, military, and social context that shaped its outcome. Can you name the key figures involved? Do you know the strategies and tactics employed? Why does the battle have enduring significance in the historical landscape of medieval England? Introduction. The Battle of Bosworth is a cornerstone event in the annals of English history. It was the culmination of a protracted dynastic struggle between the houses of Lancaster and York, collectively known as the Wars of the Roses. The conflict at Bosworth not only decided the fate of these two rival houses, but also established Henry Tudor as King Henry VII, marking the beginning of the Tudor dynasty. Let us delve into the multifaceted aspects of the battle, from the intricate political machinations leading up to the confrontation to the detailed military maneuvers on the battlefield, and finally, understand the far-reaching implications of the battle's outcome. Political context. The Wars of the Roses were a series of civil wars fought over control of the English throne, primarily between the Lancastrian and Yorkist factions. The conflict originated from the complex web of claims to the throne stemming from the descendants of King Edward III. The immediate lead-up to Bosworth involved the weakening of King Richard III's position following the death of his son and heir, Edward of Middleham, in 1484. Richard's rule was further destabilized by the defection of key nobles and the public's discontent following the controversial circumstances surrounding his ascent to the throne, particularly the alleged murder of his nephews, the princes in the Tower. The Wars of the Roses, a background. The Wars of the Roses began in 1455 and spanned over 3 decades, with intermittent periods of peace. The roots of the conflict can be traced back to the reign of Edward III, whose numerous sons created a complicated line of succession. The immediate cause of the wars, however, was the mental instability of King Henry VI and the ensuing power struggle between his supporters, the Lancastrians, and those of Richard, Duke of York. Henry VI's bouts of insanity and the incompetence of his reign led to the rise of powerful nobles who vied for control. Richard, Duke of York, initially positioned himself as a protector of the realm but eventually laid claim to the throne. His son, Edward IV, successfully usurped Henry VI, marking the first major triumph for the Yorkist faction. The ascendancy of Richard III. Richard III's path to the throne was fraught with controversy. As the younger brother of Edward IV, Richard was initially a loyal supporter of his brother's reign. However, upon Edward's death in 1483, Richard assumed the role of Lord Protector for his young nephews, Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury. The mysterious disappearance and presumed murder of these princes in the Tower of London cast a shadow over Richard's legitimacy. His usurpation of the throne alienated many nobles and sowed the seeds of rebellion. Richard's reign was marked by efforts to consolidate power and quell dissent. He enacted legal reforms and sought to stabilize the economy, but his rule was continually undermined by the pervasive rumors surrounding the fate of the princes in the Tower and the legitimacy of his claim to the throne. This turmoil created an opportunity for Henry Tudor, a distant claimant with Lancastrian ties, to challenge Richard's rule. Key figures. Richard III. The Yorkist king, Richard III, was a seasoned military commander with a reputation for both ruthlessness and competence. Despite his military acumen, his reign was marred by accusations of usurpation and tyranny. Henry Tudor. Henry Tudor, later Henry VII, was the Lancastrian claimant to the throne. His claim was tenuous, relying heavily on his descent from John of Gaunt through an illegitimate line. Nevertheless, his mother, Margaret Beaufort, was instrumental in garnering support for his cause. The nobility. The allegiance of the English nobility was crucial in the outcome of the battle. Key figures included Thomas, Lord Stanley, and his brother, Sir William Stanley, whose support for Henry was pivotal. Their decision to switch sides during the battle was a decisive factor in Richard's defeat. Richard III, the King in the North. Richard III was born in 1452 the youngest surviving son of Richard, Duke of York. From a young age, he was exposed to the turbulent politics of the era. Richard demonstrated loyalty and military prowess, notably at the Battle of Barnet and the Battle of Tewkesbury, which solidified his reputation as a formidable commander. His rise to power was facilitated by his older brother, Edward IV, who granted him extensive lands and titles in the north of England. Despite his accomplishments, Richard's reign was overshadowed by the events leading to his coronation. The disappearance of Edward V and his brother, the Duke of York, left an indelible stain on his legacy. Richard's efforts to legitimize his rule included public displays of piety and justice, but these were insufficient to quell the rumors and dissent. Henry Tudor, the exiled claimant. Henry Tudor's claim to the English throne was tenuous at best. Born in 1457, he spent much of his early life in exile in Brittany, following the downfall of the Lancastrian cause. His mother, Margaret Beaufort, played a crucial role in maintaining his claim and securing alliances. Henry's return to England in 1485 was orchestrated with the support of disaffected Yorkist and Lancastrian nobles, who saw in him a figure capable of uniting the factions and ending the Civil War. Henry's upbringing in exile instilled in him a cautious and pragmatic approach to politics. His claim was bolstered by his betrothal to Elizabeth of York, daughter of Edward IV, which promised to unite the warring houses. Henry's military experience was limited, but he compensated for this by surrounding himself with capable commanders and advisors. The role of the Stanley brothers. Thomas Stanley, 1st Earl of Derby, and his brother, Sir William Stanley, played pivotal roles in the outcome of the Battle of Bosworth. The Stanleys were powerful magnates with substantial influence in the northwest of England. Their support was crucial to both Richard III and Henry Tudor. Throughout the conflict, the Stanleys maintained a cautious neutrality, ultimately aligning with Henry at the decisive moment. Thomas Stanley's marriage to Margaret Beaufort, Henry's mother, further complicated his position. Despite nominally supporting Richard III, the Stanleys were instrumental in the final outcome of the battle. Their defection to Henry's side, spurred by political calculations and personal connections, was a turning point in the confrontation. Military strategies and tactics. The Battle of Bosworth was fought near the small market town of Market Bosworth in Leicestershire. The exact location of the battlefield has been a matter of historical debate, but recent archaeological findings have provided a clearer picture. Richard III's position. Richard III positioned his forces on Ambion Hill, a strong defensive location. His army was composed of experienced troops, including a significant contingent of mounted knights. Richard's strategy hinged on a swift, decisive engagement, leveraging his superior position and the loyalty of his core supporters. Henry Tudor's approach. Henry Tudor's forces were numerically inferior and less experienced. His army consisted largely of French mercenaries and Welsh supporters. Henry's strategy focused on cautious engagement, aiming to draw out Richard's forces and exploit any weaknesses. Stanley intervention. The role of the Stanley brothers was critical. Nominally aligned with Richard, they maintained a cautious neutrality until the battle's outcome seemed apparent. Their intervention on Henry's side significantly tilted the balance of power. Richard III's military disposition. Richard III's army, estimated at around 10,000 to 12,000 men, was strategically positioned on Ambion Hill. This elevated ground provided a significant tactical advantage, allowing Richard to survey the battlefield and control the engagement. His forces included a corps of heavily armored knights, archers, and infantry, organized into 3 main divisions or battles. Richard's vanguard was commanded by the Duke of Norfolk, a seasoned veteran. The main body of the army was under Richard's direct command, while the rearguard was led by the Earl of Northumberland. This arrangement was designed to maximize the effectiveness of his forces, with the cavalry poised for a decisive charge. Henry Tudor's forces. Henry Tudor's army was considerably smaller, estimated at around 5,000 men. His forces were a mix of French mercenaries, Welsh supporters, and English exiles. Henry's lack of direct military experience was offset by his reliance on experienced commanders, including the Earl of Oxford, who played a crucial role in organizing and leading the troops. Henry's strategy was cautious, reflecting his numerical inferiority and the necessity to draw Richard into a disadvantageous position. He positioned his forces in a way that minimized their exposure and maximized their defensive capabilities, awaiting the right moment to strike. The role of the Stanleys. The Stanley brothers commanded a separate force, positioned between the two main armies. Their intervention was uncertain until the final stages of the battle. Their forces, numbering around 3,000 men, were strategically placed to either support Richard or Henry, depending on the unfolding situation. The Stanleys' decision to support Henry Tudor was influenced by a combination of personal, political, and familial considerations. Their timely intervention, attacking Richard's flank, proved decisive, contributing significantly to the Yorkist defeat. The battle commenced with Richard's forces descending from Ambien Hill to engage Henry's troops. Initial skirmishes saw Richard's men gaining the upper hand. However, as the battle progressed, the tide turned. Richard, in a bold and desperate move, led a charge aimed directly at Henry Tudor, hoping to end the conflict by killing the Lancastrian leader. This audacious maneuver brought Richard perilously close to victory, but ultimately failed when the Stanleys intervened decisively. The intervention of Sir William Stanley, attacking Richard's flank, proved catastrophic for the Yorkist forces. Surrounded and outnumbered, Richard III fought valiantly but was ultimately unhorsed and killed, marking the end of the battle and his reign. His death signified the collapse of Yorkist resistance and the dawn of the Tudor era. Initial engagements. The battle began with Richard's vanguard, led by the Duke of Norfolk, advancing to engage Henry's forces. The initial clashes were fierce, with both sides suffering casualties. Norfolk's forces pushed Henry's troops back, gaining an early advantage. However, the Lancastrian forces, under the command of the Earl of Oxford, held their ground, repelling the Yorkist advance. Richard's charge. As the battle reached its climax, Richard III made a bold decision to personally lead a cavalry charge aimed at Henry Tudor. This move was intended to break the Lancastrian line and capture or kill Henry, thereby ending the battle swiftly. Richard's charge was a high-risk maneuver, reflecting his desperation and determination to secure victory. Richard's personal bravery was evident as he fought his way through the Lancastrian ranks, coming within striking distance of Henry. However, the intervention of the Stanley forces at this critical juncture turned the tide. Sir William Stanley's attack on Richard's flank disrupted the Yorkist charge, leading to chaos and disarray. The death of Richard III. Richard III's death marked the turning point of the battle. Unhorsed and surrounded, he fought valiantly until he was overwhelmed and killed. His death on the battlefield symbolized the end of the Yorkist cause and the triumph of Henry Tudor. The exact circumstances of Richard's death have been the subject of historical debate, but contemporary accounts emphasize his bravery and the brutal nature of the conflict. The death of Richard III was not only a personal tragedy for the king, but also a symbolic moment that marked the end of an era. His body was later taken to Leicester and hastily buried in a humble grave, reflecting the ignominy of his defeat. The discovery of Richard's remains in 2012 provided new insights into the injuries he sustained in his final moments, offering a poignant reminder of the brutality of medieval warfare. Aftermath and significance. The aftermath of the Battle of Bosworth had profound implications for England. Henry Tudor's victory established him as Henry VII, the first Tudor king. He solidified his claim through marriage to Elizabeth of York, thereby uniting the warring houses and ending the dynastic conflict. The battle also marked the decline of the feudal system and the rise of a more centralized monarchical power, laying the groundwork for the modern British state. Political stability. Henry VII's reign focused on consolidating power, reducing the influence of the nobility, and strengthening the financial foundations of the monarchy. His establishment of the Court of Star Chamber and other administrative reforms curtailed the power of rebellious nobles and reinforced royal authority. By promoting loyal supporters and creating a network of spies and informers, Henry ensured the stability of his reign. Economic and social reforms. Henry VII's economic policies were aimed at rebuilding the royal finances, which had been depleted by years of civil war. He implemented measures to promote trade and commerce, including treaties with foreign powers and the establishment of a more efficient tax system. These reforms helped to stabilize the economy and lay the foundations for future prosperity. Socially, Henry sought to reduce the power of the overmighty subjects by restricting the practice of retaining private armies. This policy helped to curb the influence of the nobility and promote greater centralization of power. Cultural impact. The Battle of Bosworth has been immortalized in literature and popular culture, most notably in William Shakespeare's play Richard III. The portrayal of Richard as a villainous usurper has influenced public perception for centuries, despite ongoing historical reassessment. The battle's legacy has also been commemorated in various historical novels, films, and television series, highlighting its enduring fascination. Historical reassessment. Modern historians have reevaluated the legacy of Richard III, challenging the Tudor propaganda that painted him as a malevolent tyrant. Archaeological discoveries, such as the finding of Richard's remains in 2012, have sparked renewed interest and debate about his life and reign. These findings have provided new insights into Richard's physical appearance, health, and the circumstances of his death, prompting a more nuanced understanding of his character and reign. The reassessment of Richard III's legacy has been fueled by a combination of historical research, archaeological evidence, and public interest. The discovery of his remains in Leicester and subsequent reburial in 2015 provided a focal point for renewed interest and debate. This reassessment has led to a more balanced view of Richard, recognizing his administrative and military skills while acknowledging the controversies that marred his reign. Conclusion. The Battle of Bosworth stands as a defining moment in English history, encapsulating the end of medieval dynastic warfare and the beginning of a new era under the Tudor dynasty. The battle's outcome was shaped by a complex interplay of political intrigue, military strategy, and personal ambition. Its legacy continues to resonate, offering rich insights into the nature of power, legitimacy, and historical memory. Through detailed analysis, we gain a deeper understanding of this pivotal event and its enduring impact on the course of English history. The significance of the Battle of Bosworth extends beyond the immediate political and military outcomes. It represents a transformative moment that reshaped the political landscape of England, paving the way for the centralization of power and the development of a more modern state. The legacy of Bosworth continues to be felt in the ongoing debates about monarchy, legitimacy, and the nature of historical memory. Through this detailed analysis, we have explored the multifaceted dimensions of the Battle of Bosworth, from the intricate political context to the dramatic events on the battlefield and the far-reaching consequences of the battle's outcome. This comprehensive examination provides a deeper understanding of this pivotal event and its enduring impact on English history. Before we wrap up, we encourage you to subscribe to our channel in order to explore more about medieval history. Check out our other videos on the channel or share your thoughts and questions in the comments below. We love hearing from you. Thanks for joining us on this journey through time. Stay curious and keep exploring.
Divine strategies, the role of religion in medieval warfare. In the heart of the medieval period, warfare was more than a contest of arms, armor, and tactics. It was a clash of ideologies, values, and most profoundly, beliefs. Religion was not merely an accessory to medieval society, it was the very core of existence, guiding both rulers and warriors in their decisions on and off the battlefield. Let's explore how faith shaped strategies, inspired armies, and justified conflicts during this tumultuous period. Through divine authority, religious rituals, and holy symbols, medieval warfare became as much a spiritual endeavor as a physical one. The divine justification for war, crusades, and the concept of holy war. One of the most striking examples of religion guiding warfare strategies is the Crusades. Launched in the late 11th century, the Crusades were military expeditions sanctioned by the Pope to reclaim the Holy Land from Muslim rule. While territorial ambitions and economic incentives played a role, religious fervor was the main rallying cry. Crusaders saw themselves as soldiers of Christ, fighting to defend Christianity and secure the sacred sites of Jerusalem. The notion of a just war, derived from Christian doctrine, offered a moral framework that shaped medieval conflicts. According to St. Augustine's earlier writings on just war, wars could be justified if they were fought in defense of faith, against perceived evil, or to reclaim territories wrongfully taken. In the case of the Crusades, the papal endorsement gave the military campaigns a sense of divine legitimacy. Soldiers marched to battle believing they were absolved of their sins, with eternal salvation promised as their ultimate reward. This powerful fusion of religious belief and military purpose made the Crusades a defining example of how religion could shape the direction, motivation, and strategy of medieval warfare. Papal influence and the moral compass of warfare. The influence of religion on medieval warfare extended beyond specific conflicts like the Crusades. Religious leaders wielded significant power in shaping the moral compass of their societies, often advising kings and commanders on when and how to go to war. The papacy itself became a central authority in determining whether wars were deemed morally acceptable. In many cases, popes issued formal calls to arms, urging monarchs to defend Christendom or intervene in heretical uprisings. One prominent example is Pope Urban II's call to arms at the Council of Clermont in 1095, where he urged Christian warriors to take up the cross and fight the Muslim forces in the Holy Land. His speech not only inspired thousands of nobles, knights, and peasants to join the First Crusade but also marked the beginning of a series of papal-backed military campaigns that would dominate much of medieval European politics for centuries. The papal authority gave rulers and knights a higher moral cause to fight for, one that transcended the earthly ambitions of land, wealth, or political power. In other instances, religious figures served as intermediaries in conflict, negotiating truces or even preventing battles from occurring. The Church's moral authority could also serve to limit the violence during wartime, as seen in the Peace of God and Truce of God movements. These initiatives aim to restrict fighting to certain times or protect civilians and non-combatants during periods of war. Through these examples, we see how the Church was deeply involved in the ethical framework surrounding warfare, shaping not only who fought but how they fought. Faith as a psychological weapon, religious symbols and warfare. Religion not only provided moral justification for war, but also served as a powerful tool of psychological warfare. Sacred symbols, relics, and emblems became essential elements of medieval military strategy, inspiring troops while intimidating their enemies. In a period where belief in divine intervention was widespread, the sight of a religious symbol could lift the spirits of soldiers or strike fear into the hearts of their foes. The most prominent example of such a symbol was the Christian cross. Crusaders often emblazoned their shields and tunics with the cross, signifying that they were not merely soldiers but instruments of God's will. This visual representation of faith reinforced their belief that they fought with divine backing. The sight of an army advancing under the banner of the cross could demoralize opponents, as it suggested that God was on the side of the Christian warriors. Similarly, Muslim forces in the Crusades rallied under the crescent, a symbol of Islam and a reminder of their own divine support. These symbols were not only used on the battlefield but were central to the rituals before and after combat. Blessings of weapons, prayers for victory, and the veneration of saints and relics were common practices in medieval armies. For example, the French King Charles VII carried the banner of Joan of Arc into battle, believing it had divine protection that would bring victory against the English. Such practices show how religion intertwined with warfare, giving spiritual meaning to the tools and acts of violence. Religious propaganda and the use of relics. Relics played an extraordinary role in both the psychological and strategic aspects of medieval warfare. It was believed that these holy objects carried divine power, offering protection and favor in battles. Kings and commanders would often carry relics of saints into battle as a means of securing divine aid. For example, King Louis IX of France, during the Seventh Crusade, carried relics of the True Cross and other Christian saints as he led his armies into combat. These relics were considered so sacred that their loss could demoralize an entire army, while their presence was believed to ensure victory. In addition to relics, religious figures were often involved in the ceremonies surrounding war. Priests would bless the soldiers, weapons, and flags before battle, and special masses were held to pray for victory. The association of religious rites with warfare offered a spiritual dimension to the battles, convincing soldiers that they fought not only for their earthly lords but for God Himself. Religious factions and internal conflict, civil wars and power struggles. While religion often unified medieval warriors against external enemies, it also played a central role in internal conflicts. Civil wars and dynastic struggles frequently took on a religious dimension, with rival factions using faith to justify their causes. The investiture controversy of the 11th and 12th centuries, for instance, was a power struggle between the Holy Roman Emperors and the papacy over the appointment of bishops. This conflict had a profound impact on the political and military landscape of medieval Europe, with armies rallying behind religiously motivated leaders who claimed divine right or authority over the church. Similarly, the wars of religion in the later medieval period, particularly in France, pitted Catholics against Protestants in violent struggles over religious doctrine and control of the state. These internal conflicts demonstrate how religion could both unify and divide, shaping the military strategies and alliances of the time. The legacy of religion in medieval warfare. The role of religion in medieval warfare was pervasive and far-reaching. From the mass mobilization of the Crusades to the civil wars driven by religious factionalism, faith shaped not only the justifications for war but also the strategies and outcomes. Religious leaders influenced the decisions of kings, religious symbols inspired and demoralized armies, and religious conflicts changed the course of history. The legacy of this divine influence on warfare continued into later centuries, with religious wars marking much of early modern European history. The concept of just war and the intertwining of faith with politics and military strategy persisted long after the medieval era, shaping the nature of warfare for centuries to come. In conclusion, medieval warfare was not only about physical conquest and defense, it was a spiritual struggle, fought under the watchful eyes of divine forces. As we reflect on this period, it becomes clear that the strategies of kings and commanders were inseparable from the religious convictions that permeated their world. Religion was the heartbeat of medieval life, and on the battlefield, it was a force as potent as any sword or shield. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the profound role of religion in shaping medieval warfare. Don't forget to subscribe to Medieval Chronicles 1066 for more captivating insights into history. Until next time, may your curiosity guide you to new discoveries.
What was the English Civil War? How did it change England? What were both sides fighting for? Who were King Charles I and the Cavaliers? Who were Oliver Cromwell and the New Model Army? Welcome to Medieval Chronicles 1066. The English Civil War, spanning from 1642 to 1651, was a watershed event in the history of England, marking the culmination of deep-seated political, social, and religious tensions that had been simmering for decades. This protracted conflict between the Royalists, who supported King Charles I, and the parliamentarians, who championed a republican system, fundamentally altered the landscape of English governance and society. The ramifications of the war extended far beyond the battlefield, influencing the trajectory of English political institutions, social structures, religious freedoms, and legal reforms. Let's explore the multifaceted causes, significant events, and enduring consequences of the English Civil War, demonstrating how this single conflict indelibly shaped the future of England. Background, political and social context. The early 17th century in England was a period marked by intense political and social turmoil. The reigns of King James I and his son, Charles I, were characterized by a steadfast belief in the divine right of kings, a doctrine asserting that monarchs were answerable only to God and not to their subjects. This belief frequently brought the monarchy into conflict with Parliament, which sought to curtail royal prerogatives and assert its own authority. Under James I, tensions were somewhat contained, but the accession of Charles I in 1625 exacerbated existing conflicts. Charles I's policies, particularly his financial mismanagement and attempts to govern without Parliament, fueled widespread discontent. His imposition of unpopular taxes and efforts to enforce religious conformity through the Anglican Church alienated many of his subjects, particularly the Puritans, who sought to purify the Church of England of remnants of Catholicism. Religious divisions. Religious conflict played a crucial role in the lead-up to the English Civil War. England, a predominantly Protestant nation, was deeply divided between Anglicans, Puritans, and a small but significant Catholic minority. Charles I's marriage to Henrietta Maria, a Catholic French princess, and his perceived favoritism towards Catholic practices heightened fears of a return to Catholicism. The religious tensions were further compounded by Charles I's attempts to impose a uniform style of worship across the kingdom, which many viewed as an infringement on their religious liberties. The enforcement of the Book of Common Prayer in Scotland in 1637 led to widespread unrest and the Bishops' Wars, which drained the royal coffers and weakened Charles's position. Economic and political strains. Economically, the early 17th century was a period of significant strain for many Englishmen. The agrarian economy was subject to fluctuations in harvest yields, and the ongoing wars and financial mismanagement by the monarchy exacerbated economic hardships. Charles I's efforts to raise revenue without parliamentary consent through measures such as ship money were deeply unpopular and viewed as illegal. Politically, the relationship between the monarchy and Parliament deteriorated rapidly. The period of personal rule, 1629 to 1640, during which Charles I attempted to govern without calling Parliament, created a sense of disenfranchisement among the political elite. The calling of the Long Parliament in 1640, initially to address the financial crisis brought on by the Bishops' Wars, quickly became a platform for airing grievances against the king. The outbreak of war. Initial conflicts and key battles. The English Civil War formally began in August 1642, when King Charles I raised his standard at Nottingham, signaling his intent to oppose Parliament by force. The early stages of the conflict were characterized by a series of inconclusive battles, such as the Battle of Edgehill in October 1642. This initial engagement, while not decisive, demonstrated that the conflict would be both protracted and bloody. Strategies and tactics. Both the Royalists and parliamentarians employed various strategies and tactics throughout the war. The Royalists, also known as Cavaliers, relied heavily on their strong cavalry and the support of many noble families. Their strategy often involved swift cavalry charges designed to break the enemy lines. In contrast, the parliamentarians, or Roundheads, emphasized disciplined infantry formations, and gradually developed a more professional fighting force. The formation of the new model army in 1645 was a pivotal moment in the conflict. This standing army, led by capable commanders such as Sir Thomas Fairfax and Oliver Cromwell, was characterized by its rigorous training, discipline, and merit-based promotion system. Impact on civilians. The war had a devastating impact on the civilian population. Towns and villages often found themselves caught in the crossfire, leading to widespread destruction and suffering. The war disrupted agriculture and trade, causing food shortages and economic hardship. Many civilians were displaced, and the social fabric of numerous communities was torn apart. Major turning points. The Battle of Marston Moor, 1644. The Battle of Marston Moor, fought on July 2, 1644, was one of the largest and most decisive engagements of the English Civil War. The Parliamentarians, bolstered by their Scottish allies, faced off against the Royalist forces in the north of England. The battle was a resounding victory for the Parliamentarians, effectively destroying the Royalist army in the north and weakening their overall position. The Battle of Naseby, 1645. The Battle of Naseby, fought on June 14, 1645, was another crucial turning point in the war. The new model army, under the command of Sir Thomas Fairfax and Oliver Cromwell, decisively defeated the forces of King Charles I. The Royalists suffered heavy losses, and the Parliamentarians captured much of the Royalist artillery and supplies. This victory effectively ended organized Royalist resistance and paved the way for the eventual capture of the king. Capture and trial of Charles I. Charles I was captured in 1646 and subsequently imprisoned. Despite attempts to negotiate a settlement, tensions remained high, leading to the outbreak of the Second Civil War in 1648. The Parliamentarians emerged victorious once again, and in January 1649, Charles I was put on trial for treason. His trial and subsequent execution on January 30, 1649, were radical and unprecedented acts that shocked Europe and marked the end of absolute monarchy in England. What was the English Civil War? How did it change England? What were both sides fighting for? Who were King Charles I and the Cavaliers? Who were Oliver Cromwell and the New Model Army? Welcome to Medieval Chronicles 1066. The English Civil War, spanning from 1642 to 1651, was a watershed event in the history of England, marking the culmination of deep-seated political, social, and religious tensions that had been simmering for decades. This protracted conflict between the Royalists, who supported King Charles I, and the Parliamentarians, who championed a republican system, fundamentally altered the landscape of English governance and society. The ramifications of the war extended far beyond the battlefield, influencing the trajectory of English political institutions, social structures, religious freedoms, and legal reforms. Let's explore the multifaceted causes, significant events, and enduring consequences of the English Civil War, demonstrating how this single conflict indelibly shaped the future of England. Background, political and social context. The early 17th century in England was a period marked by intense political and social turmoil. The reigns of King James I and his son, Charles I, were characterized by a steadfast belief in the divine right of kings, a doctrine asserting that monarchs were answerable only to God and not to their subjects. This belief frequently brought the monarchy into conflict with Parliament, which sought to curtail royal prerogatives and assert its own authority. Under James I, tensions were somewhat contained, but the accession of Charles I in 1625 exacerbated existing conflicts. Charles I's policies, particularly his financial mismanagement and attempts to govern without Parliament, fueled widespread discontent. His imposition of unpopular taxes and efforts to enforce religious conformity through the Anglican Church alienated many of his subjects, particularly the Puritans, who sought to purify the Church of England of remnants of Catholicism. Religious divisions. Religious conflict played a crucial role in the lead-up to the English Civil War. England, a predominantly Protestant nation, was deeply divided between Anglicans, Puritans, and a small but significant Catholic minority. Charles I's marriage to Henrietta Maria, a Catholic French princess, and his perceived favoritism towards Catholic practices heightened fears of a return to Catholicism. The religious tensions were further compounded by Charles I's attempts to impose a uniform style of worship across the kingdom, which many viewed as an infringement on their religious liberties. The enforcement of the Book of Common Prayer in Scotland in 1637 led to widespread unrest and the Bishops' Wars, which drained the royal coffers and weakened Charles's position. Economic and political strains. Economically, the early 17th century was a period of significant strain for many Englishmen. The agrarian economy was subject to fluctuations in harvest yields, and the ongoing wars and financial mismanagement by the monarchy exacerbated economic hardships. Charles I's efforts to raise revenue without parliamentary consent through measures such as ship money were deeply unpopular and viewed as illegal. Politically, the relationship between the monarchy and parliament deteriorated rapidly. The period of personal rule, 1629 to 1640, during which Charles I attempted to govern without calling parliament, created a sense of disenfranchisement among the political elite. The calling of the Long Parliament in 1640, initially to address the financial crisis brought on by the Bishops' Wars, quickly became a platform for airing grievances against the king. The outbreak of war. Initial conflicts and key battles. The English Civil War formally began in August 1642, when King Charles I raised his standard at Nottingham, signaling his intent to oppose Parliament by force. The early stages of the conflict were characterized by a series of inconclusive battles, such as the Battle of Edgehill in October 1642. This initial engagement, while not decisive, demonstrated that the conflict would be both protracted and bloody. Strategies and tactics. Both the Royalists and parliamentarians employed various strategies and tactics throughout the war. The Royalists, also known as Cavaliers, relied heavily on their strong cavalry and the support of many noble families. Their strategy often involved swift cavalry charges designed to break the enemy lines. In contrast, the parliamentarians, or Roundheads, emphasized disciplined infantry formations and gradually developed a more professional fighting force. The formation of the new model army in 1645 was a pivotal moment in the conflict. This standing army, led by capable commanders such as Sir Thomas Fairfax and Oliver Cromwell, was characterized by its rigorous training, discipline, and merit-based promotion system. Impact on civilians. The war had a devastating impact on the civilian population. Towns and villages often found themselves caught in the crossfire, leading to widespread destruction and suffering. The war disrupted agriculture and trade, causing food shortages and economic hardship. Many civilians were displaced, and the social fabric of numerous communities was torn apart. Major turning points. The Battle of Marston Moor, 1644. The Battle of Marston Moor, fought on July 2, 1644, was one of the largest and most decisive engagements of the English Civil War. The parliamentarians, bolstered by their Scottish allies, faced off against the Royalist forces in the north of England. The battle was a resounding victory for the parliamentarians, effectively destroying the Royalist army in the north and weakening their overall position. The Battle of Naseby, 1645. The Battle of Naseby, fought on June 14, 1645, was another crucial turning point in the war. The new model army, under the command of Sir Thomas Fairfax and Oliver Cromwell, decisively defeated the forces of King Charles I. The Royalists suffered heavy losses, and the parliamentarians captured much of the Royalist artillery and supplies. This victory effectively ended organized Royalist resistance and paved the way for the eventual capture of the king. Capture and trial of Charles I. Charles I was captured in 1646 and subsequently imprisoned. Despite attempts to negotiate a settlement, tensions remained high, leading to the outbreak of the Second Civil War in 1648. The parliamentarians emerged victorious once again, and in January 1649, Charles I was put on trial for treason. His trial and subsequent execution on January 30, 1649, were radical and unprecedented acts that shocked Europe and marked the end of absolute monarchy in England. Political and social changes during the war. Emergence of new political ideas. The English Civil War was a catalyst for the emergence of new political ideas. Radical groups such as the Levelers advocated for extended suffrage, equality before the law, and religious freedom. The Levelers, led by figures like John Lilburne and Richard Overton, pushed for a more egalitarian society and sought to dismantle the hierarchical structures that had long dominated English society. Although these radical ideas were not fully realized at the time, they planted the seeds for future democratic reforms. The Levelers' demands for a written constitution, regular elections, and expanded suffrage would later influence political thought and movements in England and beyond. The role of the New Model Army. The New Model Army played a crucial role in shaping the political landscape during and after the war. Composed of soldiers who were often motivated by religious and political beliefs, the army became a powerful political force. Its leaders, including Oliver Cromwell, were instrumental in the eventual outcome of the war and the subsequent political developments. The army's influence extended beyond the battlefield. The soldiers' shared experiences and common cause fostered a sense of camaraderie and collective identity. This solidarity translated into political activism, with the army advocating for its interests and the broader goals of the parliamentarian cause. Social impact on different classes and regions. The English Civil War had a profound impact on different classes and regions within England. The aristocracy, particularly those who supported the royalist cause, suffered significant losses in terms of property and influence. Many royalist estates were confiscated, and the traditional power structures of the nobility were weakened. In contrast, the gentry and merchant classes, who often supported Parliament, gained greater political and economic power. The war created opportunities for these groups to expand their influence and assert their interests. The redistribution of land and wealth following the war further altered the economic landscape, leading to greater opportunities for the emerging middle class. The war also deepened regional divisions within England. Some areas, particularly those that experienced intense fighting and destruction, were left economically and socially devastated. Other regions, which may have been less directly affected by the conflict, experienced different trajectories of recovery and development. The end of the war and its aftermath. The Second Civil War and the rise of Oliver Cromwell. The end of the First Civil War in 1646 did not bring immediate stability. The unresolved tensions and lingering animosities led to the outbreak of the Second Civil War in 1648. This conflict saw renewed fighting between royalist forces and the parliamentarians, with the latter emerging victorious once again. Oliver Cromwell, who had risen to prominence as a capable military commander, played a central role in the parliamentarian victory. His leadership and strategic acumen were instrumental in defeating the royalist forces and securing the parliamentarian cause. Cromwell's influence continued to grow, and he became a key figure in the subsequent political developments. The execution of Charles I. The trial and execution of Charles I in January 1649 were radical and unprecedented acts that marked the end of absolute monarchy in England. The decision to execute the king was driven by a desire to prevent any future attempts to restore his authority and to establish a new political order. Charles I's execution sent shockwaves throughout Europe and fundamentally altered the political landscape of England. It was a definitive statement that the monarchy could not govern without the consent of Parliament, setting a precedent for the future relationship between the monarchy and Parliament. Establishment of the Commonwealth and Protectorate. Following the execution of Charles I, England was declared a Commonwealth, a republic led by Parliament and the army. The Commonwealth period, which lasted from 1649 to 1660, was marked by significant political and social upheaval. The new government faced numerous challenges, including economic difficulties, political opposition, and ongoing conflicts both domestically and abroad. Oliver Cromwell emerged as the dominant figure during this period, serving as Lord Protector from 1653 until his death in 1658. Cromwell's rule was characterized by efforts to reform society along Puritan lines. including the promotion of moral behavior and the suppression of activities considered sinful, such as theater and gambling. However, his government faced significant challenges, including economic difficulties and political opposition. The Commonwealth and Protectorate periods were characterized by ongoing conflicts, both domestically and abroad. Domestically, there were tensions between the army and civilian government, as well as unrest among those who had supported the royalist cause. Abroad, England engaged in several military campaigns, including wars with Ireland and Scotland. The instability of the Commonwealth period eventually led to the restoration of the monarchy in 1660. Charles II, the son of Charles I, was invited back to England to assume the throne. The restoration marked a return to monarchy, but the relationship between the king and parliament had fundamentally changed. The events of the Civil War and Commonwealth period had established the principle that the monarchy could not govern without parliament's consent. Long-term consequences. Establishment of constitutional monarchy. One of the most significant long-term impacts of the English Civil War was the establishment of a constitutional monarchy. The restoration of Charles II was accompanied by the passage of the Clarendon Code, which reasserted the authority of the monarchy but also acknowledged the role of Parliament. This set the stage for the Glorious Revolution of 1688, which further limited the powers of the monarchy and established the supremacy of Parliament. The Glorious Revolution, a relatively bloodless coup, resulted in the ousting of King James II and the ascension of William III and Mary II to the throne. The Bill of Rights of 1689, enacted shortly after the Revolution, codified the principles of constitutional monarchy and parliamentary sovereignty. It established key legal and political rights, such as the right to regular parliaments, free elections, and freedom of speech within Parliament. Impact on religious freedoms. The English Civil War also had a lasting impact on religious freedoms. The Toleration Act of 1689 granted freedom of worship to nonconformist Protestants, though Catholics and atheists remained excluded. The war had exposed the deep religious divisions within English society, and while full religious equality was not achieved, the period marked a significant step towards greater religious tolerance. The Toleration Act allowed nonconformist Protestant groups, such as Baptists, Congregationalists, and Quakers, to worship freely without fear of persecution. However, it did not grant them full civil rights, and many restrictions remained in place. Despite these limitations, the act represented a significant shift towards religious pluralism and set the stage for further advancements in religious freedom in subsequent centuries. Legal reforms. The conflict and subsequent political changes highlighted the need for a more codified legal system. The development of common law and the establishment of legal precedents during this period laid the groundwork for the modern British legal system. The English Civil War and the events that followed underscored the importance of the rule of law and the protection of individual rights. Legal reforms during this period included the establishment of habeas corpus, which protected individuals from arbitrary arrest and detention. The concept of judicial review, which allowed courts to assess the legality of government actions, also gained prominence. These legal principles would become cornerstones of the British legal system and influence legal systems around the world. The English Civil War in historical perspective. Comparisons with other civil conflicts. The English Civil War has often been compared to other civil conflicts, such as the American Civil War and the French Revolution. While each of these conflicts had unique causes and outcomes, they all involved fundamental struggles over governance, social order, and individual rights. The English Civil War is particularly notable for its role in shaping modern democratic principles and institutions. The American Civil War, fought between 1861 and 1865, was primarily a conflict over slavery and states' rights. Like the English Civil War, it resulted in profound changes to the nation's political and social structures. The abolition of slavery and the strengthening of federal authority were key outcomes of the American Civil War, similar to how the English Civil War led to the establishment of constitutional monarchy and parliamentary sovereignty. The French Revolution, which began in 1789, was a radical and transformative event that sought to overthrow the ancien regime and establish a republic based on the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity. The revolution's emphasis on individual rights and the rejection of absolute monarchy echoed the themes of the English Civil War. However, the French Revolution was marked by greater violence and social upheaval, culminating in the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte and the establishment of the Napoleonic Empire. Historiographical debates and interpretations. Historiographical debates about the English Civil War have evolved over time. Early historians often portrayed the conflict in terms of a struggle between tyranny and liberty. More recent scholarship has emphasized the complexity of the war, highlighting the diverse motivations and experiences of those involved. Some historians argue that the war was a conservative revolution, aimed at preserving traditional rights and privileges against perceived encroachments by the monarchy. Others see it as a more radical transformation, paving the way for modern concepts of democracy and individual rights. For instance, the Levelers and Diggers proposed ideas that, while not fully realized at the time, foreshadowed later democratic movements. These groups advocated for social equality, communal ownership of land, and expanded suffrage, challenging the traditional hierarchical structures of English society. Marxist historians have interpreted the English Civil War as a bourgeois revolution, emphasizing the rise of the capitalist class and the decline of feudalism. They argue that the war represented a shift in power from the landed aristocracy to the emerging bourgeoisie, who sought to reshape society in accordance with capitalist principles. The legacy of the English Civil War in modern England. The legacy of the English Civil War continues to resonate in contemporary discussions about governance, rights, and freedoms. The principles of constitutional monarchy, parliamentary sovereignty, and individual rights established during and after the war have become foundational elements of modern British democracy. The war's emphasis on the rule of law and the protection of individual liberties remains relevant in contemporary legal and political debates. The English Civil War also influenced the development of political thought and institutions in other countries. The ideas and principles that emerged during the conflict, such as the separation of powers and the importance of representative government, would later shape the development of democratic systems in the United States, France, and beyond. Cultural and intellectual impact. Literature and the arts. The English Civil War was not only a political and social upheaval, but also a period of significant cultural and intellectual activity. The war and its aftermath saw a flourishing of literature, philosophy, and scientific inquiry. Writers and thinkers grappled with the profound changes taking place in their society, producing works that reflected the complexities of the time. John Milton, one of the most famous poets of the period, wrote extensively about the political and religious turmoil of the era. His epic poem, Paradise Lost, can be seen as an allegory of the fall from grace and the consequences of disobedience and rebellion. Similarly, his pamphlets on political and religious issues articulated the radical ideas that were circulating during the Civil War. The theater also played a significant role in reflecting and shaping public opinion during the war. Playwrights such as William Davenant and James Shirley produced works that commented on the political and social issues of the time. The closure of the theaters by the Puritan government in 1642 marked a significant cultural shift, reflecting the changing attitudes towards the arts and entertainment. Development of political philosophy. The English Civil War influenced the development of political philosophy, with thinkers such as Thomas Hobbes and John Locke making significant contributions. Thomas Hobbes, witnessing the chaos and violence of the period, wrote Leviathan, in which he argued for a strong central authority to prevent disorder and maintain peace. Hobbes's social contract theory emphasized the need for a powerful sovereign to ensure stability and protect individuals from the dangers of the state of nature. In contrast, John Locke, writing in the aftermath of the Glorious Revolution, developed theories of government that emphasized the protection of individual rights and the consent of the governed. Locke's two treatises of government argued for the separation of powers and the right of citizens to overthrow a government that failed to protect their rights. These ideas would later influence the development of democratic systems in England and beyond, including the American Revolution and the creation of the United States Constitution. Advancements in science and intellectual inquiry. In the realm of science, the the period of the Civil War and the Commonwealth saw significant advancements. The Royal Society, founded in 1660, became a center for scientific research and innovation. Figures like Robert Boyle and Isaac Newton made groundbreaking contributions to fields such as chemistry and physics, laying the foundations for the scientific revolution. The English Civil War and its aftermath created an environment that encouraged intellectual inquiry and experimentation. The political and social upheaval of the period challenged traditional authorities and fostered a spirit of questioning and exploration. This intellectual ferment contributed to the development of the scientific method and the growth of empirical science. The role of women in the English Civil War. Women as active participants. While much of the historical focus on the English Civil War has been on the male political and military leaders, it is important to recognize the significant roles played by women during this period. Women were active participants in various capacities, from managing estates and businesses in the absence of men to engaging in political and religious debates. Women on both sides of the conflict were involved in supporting the war effort. Royalist women, such as Queen Henrietta Maria, played key roles in rallying support for the king and raising funds for his cause. Parliamentarian women also contributed to the war effort, often taking on roles traditionally reserved for men, such as managing farms and businesses. Intellectual and political contributions. In addition to their practical contributions, women were also active in the intellectual and political life of the period. They wrote pamphlets, participated in religious meetings, and engaged in debates about the future of the nation. Some women, like the leveler Catherine Chidley, argued for greater religious and political freedoms, challenging the traditional gender roles of their time. The war also had significant impacts on women's lives and status. The disruption of traditional social structures and the absence of men created opportunities for women to assume new responsibilities and assert their independence. However, the end of the war and the restoration of the monarchy also saw a reassertion of traditional gender roles and the marginalization of women's contributions. The legacy of women's involvement. The involvement of women in the English Civil War left a lasting legacy. The experiences and contributions of women during this period challenged traditional gender roles and laid the groundwork for future advancements in women's rights. While the immediate post-war period saw a return to more restrictive norms, the seeds of change had been planted. The debates and writings of women during the Civil War period would later influence the women's rights movement in the 19th and 20th centuries. The Levelers' advocacy for social equality and the participation of women in political and religious debates foreshadowed later demands for women's suffrage and equal rights. The English Civil War and the development of the British Empire. Colonial policies and expansion. The English Civil War also had significant implications for the development of the British Empire. The conflict and its aftermath influenced England's colonial policies and the expansion of its overseas territories. The political and religious upheavals of the period shaped the character of English colonial ventures and the relationships between the metropole and the colonies. During the war, both the royalists and parliamentarians sought support and resources from the colonies. The Caribbean, in particular, became an important site of conflict, with colonies like Barbados becoming battlegrounds for control. The war also influenced the development of the American colonies, where settlers were deeply divided over the conflict in the mother country. The Commonwealth period and colonial ambition. The Commonwealth period saw an expansion of English colonial ambitions. Cromwell's government pursued aggressive policies in the Caribbean, including the conquest of Jamaica in 1655. These colonial ventures were driven by both economic motives and a desire to spread Protestantism. The Navigation Acts, introduced during this period, aimed to control trade and strengthen England's economic position in relation to its colonies. The Navigation Acts were a series of laws that restricted the use of foreign ships for trade between England and its colonies. These acts were designed to ensure that the benefits of colonial trade accrued primarily to England and to reduce the influence of other European powers in English colonial markets. The enforcement of these laws laid the groundwork for the mercantilist policies that would dominate English colonial policy in the 18th century. The restoration and continued expansion. The restoration of the monarchy in 1660 did not halt England's colonial expansion. The restored monarchy continued to pursue colonial ventures, often building on the foundations laid during the Commonwealth. The late 17th century saw the establishment of new colonies and the expansion of existing ones, setting the stage for the development of the British Empire in the 18th century. The Royal African Company, established in 1672, played a significant role in the expansion of the British slave trade. The company's monopoly on the trade of enslaved Africans to the English colonies fueled the growth of plantation economies in the Caribbean and North America. The profits from the slave trade and colonial plantations contributed to the economic development of England and the rise of the British Empire. Conclusion: the English Civil War was a transformative period in the history of England. It marked the end of absolute monarchy and the beginning of a constitutional system of governance. The war had profound and lasting impacts on English society, politics, religion, and culture. It paved the way for the development of modern democratic principles and institutions, influenced the course of scientific and intellectual advancements, and shaped the character of the British Empire. Understanding the English Civil War and its consequences provides valuable insights into the broader history of early modern England. The resilience and resourcefulness of the people, the emergence of new political and religious ideas, and the profound changes in social and economic structures all highlight the complexity and significance of this period. The legacy of the English Civil War continues to resonate in contemporary discussions about governance, rights, and freedoms, underscoring its enduring relevance to modern society. Thanks for listening. Like and comment, and please subscribe as that will help us get more videos out to those interested in the Middle Ages. See you next time on Medieval Chronicles 1066. Stay curious.
The 1428 Siege of Orleans, a turning point in the 100 Years' War. The Siege of Orleans, which began in October 1428, marked a critical juncture in the 100 Years' War between England and France. This conflict, spanning over a century, was rooted in complex claims to the French throne, with the English monarchy asserting rights to French territories. The Siege of Orleans was pivotal, as it represented a major English attempt to consolidate power over France by capturing a strategically vital city on the Loire River. However, the siege's eventual failure not only changed the tide of the war but also set the stage for the rise of one of history's most legendary figures, Joan of Arc. Strategic importance of Orleans. Orleans was of immense strategic importance to both the English and the French. It guarded the northern approaches to the Loire Valley, a region vital to controlling central France. For the English, Capturing the city would secure a key stronghold, allowing them to extend their influence southward. The English forces, led by Thomas de Montacute, the 4th Earl of Salisbury, began the siege with high hopes, believing that taking the city would demoralize the French and potentially force Charles VII, the French Dauphin, into submission. Initial stages of the siege. The siege officially commenced on October 12, 1428, with English forces establishing positions around the city. They sought to blockade Orleans, cutting off its supplies and starving the defenders into submission. The English used artillery to bombard the city's walls, hoping to force a swift capitulation. The French defenders, however, were determined, bolstered by local militias and the resolve of citizens within the city. Under the leadership of Jean de Dunois, the so-called Bastard of Orleans, the defenders repelled several early attacks. Despite the English blockade, French forces managed to keep supply lines open intermittently, ensuring that the city did not succumb quickly. English struggles and Joan of Arc's arrival. The initial momentum of the siege faltered when the English commander, the Earl of Salisbury, was mortally wounded by a cannon shot early in the campaign. His death disrupted English strategy, and subsequent commanders struggled to maintain the siege's intensity. In addition to logistical challenges, the English faced increasing resistance from the French countryside, where local communities rallied to protect Orleans from falling into enemy hands. The siege turning point came in early 1429, with the arrival of Joan of Arc. A young peasant girl claiming divine guidance, Joan persuaded Charles VII to send her to relieve Orleans. Her presence inspired the French garrison and citizens, who saw her as a symbol of divine intervention. Under Joan's leadership, French forces launched a series of bold counterattacks, ultimately breaking the English siege by May 8, 1429. Legacy of the siege. The Siege of Orleans marked the beginning of a resurgence for the French in the 100 Years' War. The failure of the English to capture the city shattered their aura of invincibility and revived French morale. Joan of Arc's success at Orleans also solidified her as a national heroine and turned her into a symbol of French resistance. This victory paved the way for Charles VII's coronation in Reims and the gradual recovery of French territory from English control, culminating in the war's conclusion in 1453. The Siege of Orleans thus stands as a defining moment in medieval warfare, where tactical decisions, leadership shifts, and unexpected heroism dramatically altered the course of history. Thanks for listening. Like and comment. And please subscribe, as that will help us get more videos out to those interested in the Middle Ages. See you next time on Medieval Chronicles 1066. Stay curious. the deadliest medieval weapons and how they were used, a journey through the arsenal of the Middle Ages. The medieval period, spanning from the 5th to the 15th century, is often characterized by its turbulent battles, feudal conflicts, and iconic warriors. Central to these historical clashes were the weapons that shaped the outcomes of battles and, by extension, the fate of entire nations. Understanding the deadliest medieval weapons and how they were used offers a fascinating insight into the tactics, innovations, and brutal realities of warfare in the Middle Ages. Let us explore some of the most formidable weapons of the time, detailing their design, usage, and the deadly impact they had on the battlefield. 1. The longbow, the archer's advantage. One of the most iconic and deadly weapons of the medieval era was the longbow, a powerful tool that revolutionized medieval warfare. Unlike the crossbow, which required a mechanical aid to draw, the longbow relied on the strength and skill of the archer. Made primarily of yew wood, longbows were typically around 6 feet tall and capable of shooting arrows over 200 yards. What made the longbow particularly lethal was its ability to penetrate armor from a significant distance. The longbow's impact was most famously demonstrated during the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, where English archers, using longbows, decimated the French cavalry. The arrows could penetrate chainmail and, with enough force, even plate armor, rendering knights vulnerable. The speed and range of the longbow allowed archers to remain relatively safe while picking off advancing enemies, turning battles in favor of those who mastered its use. In addition, the longbow's rapid rate of fire, an experienced archer could shoot up to 12 arrows per minute, provided a significant tactical advantage, making it a feared weapon throughout Europe. 2. The warhammer, blunt force trauma. While the longbow was ideal for ranged attacks, the warhammer was a close combat weapon designed for a different kind of destruction. This weapon emerged as a direct response to the increasing use of plate armor, which rendered many traditional swords less effective. The warhammer featured a hammerhead on one side and a spike on the other, allowing it to crush armor or pierce through it with a concentrated blow. Warhammers were favored by knights and foot soldiers alike for their ability to inflict blunt force trauma, breaking bones and damaging internal organs even without penetrating the armor. In the chaos of melee combat, a single swing of a warhammer could incapacitate or kill an enemy instantly. The weapon's compact size and relatively light weight also allowed for greater maneuverability in close quarters, making it a versatile tool in battle. Unlike swords, which required precision, the warhammer could be wielded with brute strength, making it a favorite among those looking to deal maximum damage with minimal effort. 3. The crossbow, the equalizer of warfare. The crossbow was another formidable weapon that changed the dynamics of medieval warfare. Unlike the longbow, the crossbow required less physical strength to operate, as it used a mechanical mechanism to draw the string. This allowed soldiers with minimal training to deliver lethal shots with significant force, making it a crucial equalizer on the battlefield. The crossbow could shoot bolts with enough power to pierce chainmail and even some forms of plate armor, giving infantrymen a chance against heavily armored knights. However, the crossbow had its limitations. It had a slower rate of fire compared to the longbow due to the time required to draw the string and load the bolt. Despite this, its ease of use and powerful impact made it a staple in medieval arsenals. During the Siege of Acre in 1191, crossbowmen played a critical role in repelling enemy forces from the fortified walls, demonstrating the weapon's strategic importance in both offensive and defensive scenarios. 4. The Morning Star, a weapon of terror. The Morning Star was a terrifying weapon that combined the features of a mace with the added lethality of spikes. Consisting of a spiked metal ball attached to a handle, the Morning Star was designed to maximize damage with each strike. When swung, the momentum generated by the heavy ball could crush helmets, break bones, and puncture flesh, making it one of the most fearsome close combat weapons of the Middle Ages. The psychological impact of the Morning Star was almost as significant as its physical damage. The sight of a spiked ball hurtling toward an enemy would have been enough to instill fear, potentially causing hesitation or retreat. The weapon's ability to inflict severe injuries with minimal contact made it especially useful in chaotic battle conditions where precision was less important than raw power and intimidation. 5. The trebuchet, siege warfare's ultimate weapon. When it came to siege warfare, few weapons were as iconic or as deadly as the trebuchet. Unlike a simple catapult, the trebuchet used a counterweight mechanism to hurl massive projectiles, such as stones or flaming debris, over long distances with incredible force. The primary role of the trebuchet was to breach the walls of enemy fortifications, collapsing defenses and opening the way for ground assaults. Trebuchets were used extensively during sieges in the medieval period, with some of the most famous examples being the Siege of Kenilworth Castle in 1266 and the Siege of Acre in 1189 to 1191. Capable of launching projectiles weighing up to 300 pounds, the trebuchet could reduce castle walls to rubble and cause widespread panic among defenders. The psychological and physical devastation wrought by these machines made them an essential component of medieval siege strategy. 6. The halberd, versatility on the battlefield. The halberd was a versatile pole weapon that combined the features of an axe, a spear, and a hook. This multifunctional weapon could be used to slash, stab, or hook opponents, making it a favorite among infantrymen facing mounted knights. The halberd's long reach allowed soldiers to keep enemies at a distance, while its heavy axe blade could cut through armor and flesh alike. The halberd became particularly prominent in the 14th and 15th centuries as it was effective against both mounted and unmounted foes. The hook on the back of the weapon was designed to pull riders off horses, while the spear tip could be used to thrust at approaching enemies. Its versatility and relatively low cost made the halberd a popular choice among foot soldiers, allowing them to counter the threat posed by knights effectively. 7. The sword, the quintessential weapon of the knight. No discussion of medieval weapons would be complete without mentioning the sword, the quintessential weapon of the medieval knight. Swords came in various shapes and sizes, from the short, single-handed arming sword to the long, two-handed greatsword. The sword was a symbol of status and chivalry, often passed down through generations, and revered for its craftsmanship and utility. The effectiveness of the sword depended largely on the skill of the wielder. Knights underwent rigorous training to master the art of swordplay, and their swords were often customized to their fighting style and physique. The two-handed long sword, for example, was particularly effective in dismounted combat, offering reach and power, while the arming sword was favored for its speed and agility in one-on-one encounters. 8. The battle axe, a symbol of brutality and strength. The battle axe was another formidable weapon of the Middle Ages, favored for its sheer brute force. Unlike swords, which required a certain finesse, the battle axe was a weapon of raw power, capable of cleaving through armor, wood, and bone. The battle axe was particularly favored by Vikings and later by foot soldiers in various European armies. Axes varied in size and design, from the smaller hand axes used in one hand to the massive two-handed axes that could deliver devastating blows. The Dane axe, with its long handle and wide blade, was especially notorious for its use in the hands of the fierce Viking warriors and English housecarls during the early medieval period. Its ability to deliver heavy blows made it ideal for breaking through the shields and armor of enemy soldiers. The impact of medieval weaponry on warfare. The medieval period was a time of constant innovation and adaptation in weaponry, driven by the changing nature of warfare, advances in technology, and the evolution of armor. Each of these weapons played a critical role in shaping the tactics and outcomes of battles across Europe and beyond. From the precision of the longbow to the brute force of the warhammer, from the versatile halberd to the psychological terror of the morning star, these weapons were instrumental in defining the strategies and outcomes of countless medieval conflicts. Understanding how these weapons were used not only provides insight into the military strategies of the Middle Ages, but also offers a glimpse into the lives and challenges faced by those who wielded them. For both the knights and the common foot soldiers, these tools of war were not just instruments of death, but symbols of power, survival, and the relentless human drive to dominate and defend. Thanks for listening. Like and comment. And please subscribe, as that will help us get more videos out to those interested in the Middle Ages. See you next time on Medieval Chronicles 1066. Stay curious. The 1346 Battle of Neville's Cross, a pivotal moment in the 100 Years' War. The Battle of Neville's Cross, fought on October 17, 1346, was a significant event during the 100 Years' War, marking a decisive victory for England over Scotland. This battle was a key turning point in Anglo-Scottish relations during the medieval period, with the consequences reverberating across both nations. King David II of Scotland sought to exploit England's distraction in France, where King Edward III was leading a major campaign, culminating in the famous Battle of Crecy just months earlier. Neville's Cross solidified English dominance in the northern borders while dealing a severe blow to Scottish ambitions. Let's explore the background, the lead-up to the battle, the key participants, and the long-lasting impact of the conflict on both Scotland and England. Background: the 100 Years' War and the Anglo-Scottish rivalry. The Battle of Neville's Cross occurred within the broader context of the 100 Years' War, a protracted series of conflicts between England and France over claims to the French throne. England's King Edward III pressed his claims aggressively, while Scotland, a long-standing ally of France, found itself inevitably drawn into the conflict. This alliance, known as the Auld Alliance, bound Scotland and France together in mutual defence against English aggression. It was a strategic partnership that saw Scotland become a frequent battleground in the Anglo-French rivalry, as each side sought to weaken the other's capacity by targeting their allies. In 1346, Edward III launched a major invasion of France, advancing with great success. His victory at the Battle of Crécy in August 1346 was a defining moment in medieval warfare. Sensing an opportunity, David II of Scotland sought to attack northern England while Edward's forces were engaged abroad, hoping to relieve pressure on France and assert Scottish power. The campaign was conceived as a way to exploit England's perceived vulnerability, drawing attention away from Edward's French expedition and allowing France some breathing room. The lead-up to the battle. David II assembled a large army, reportedly numbering between 12,000 and 15,000 men, consisting of knights, infantry, and archers. His plan was to invade northern England, strike deep into English territory, and force the English to recall forces from France. However, the English were not as defenceless as the Scots had believed. Edward III, foreseeing the possibility of a Scottish incursion, had left orders for an English defensive force to be prepared. Northern England's nobility, including Ralph Neville, Henry Percy, and William Zouche, the Archbishop of York, took command of a hastily assembled English army. Their forces, though smaller than the Scottish host, were well organised and stationed strategically near Durham. On October 16, 1346, the Scottish army crossed the River Tyne and began its march southward. The English, anticipating their movements, took positions near Neville's Cross, a stone monument that would later give the battle its name. The Scots made a fateful mistake by underestimating the preparedness of the English forces. The hilly terrain near Durham also favoured the English, giving them a superior defensive position. The battle. The battle began early on the morning of October 17. The English, though outnumbered, were able to exploit their advantageous position and the effective use of longbowmen. The longbow had already proven its worth at the Battle of Crécy, and it would again play a decisive role at Neville's Cross. Positioned behind protective stakes and fortified positions, the English archers unleashed devastating volleys on the advancing Scottish infantry and cavalry, causing significant losses before the Scots could engage in close combat. David II, who led the Scottish army personally, attempted several direct assaults on the English lines. However, the Scottish forces were hampered by the terrain and found it difficult to bring their full strength to bear. As the Scots faltered under the relentless barrage of arrows, the English seized the opportunity to counterattack. The English infantry, led by the likes of Ralph Neville and Henry Percy, engaged the Scottish forces in brutal hand-to-hand combat, pushing them back and fragmenting their lines. In the midst of the battle, David II was wounded twice, once in the face by an arrow. Despite his injuries, he fought valiantly but was eventually captured when he tried to flee the battlefield. The capture of the Scottish king was a catastrophic blow to the Scottish morale. His troops, now leaderless, began to scatter. Many were killed or captured as they attempted to retreat northward, with English forces pursuing them relentlessly. Key participants and military tactics. On the English side, Ralph Neville, Henry Percy, and William Zouche emerged as the key commanders who led their forces with skill and determination. The use of longbowmen, a hallmark of English military strategy during the 100 Years' War, was critical to their victory. The longbow's range and rate of fire gave the English an overwhelming advantage over the Scottish forces, who relied more heavily on infantry and cavalry. David II's leadership on the Scottish side, though brave, was ultimately flawed by his underestimation of the English defences and the difficult terrain. The Scottish reliance on frontal assaults played into the strengths of the English defensive position, making it nearly impossible for the Scots to break through. The aftermath and consequences. The consequences of the Battle of Neville's Cross were severe for Scotland. David II was taken prisoner and transported to London, where he was held captive for 11 years. His capture plunged Scotland into a period of political instability, as the country struggled to maintain cohesion without its king. Scottish raids into northern England diminished, and England's northern borders became more secure as a result. For England, the victory at Neville's Cross solidified their control over northern England and demonstrated their ability to defend against multiple fronts during the 100 Years' War. It also deprived France of a valuable ally for over a decade, weakening the old alliance and leaving France more vulnerable to English military campaigns. Moreover, the ransom demanded for David II's release placed an enormous financial strain on Scotland. Though he was eventually released in 1357 after the Treaty of Berwick, the damage to Scotland's military and economy had already been done. The defeat at Neville's Cross delayed any further significant Scottish involvement in the 100 Years' War and ensured that England remained unchallenged in the north for the foreseeable future. Thus, the Battle of Neville's Cross stands as a testament to the strategic significance of Scotland's involvement in the 100 Years' War. While David II sought to exploit England's momentary distraction with France, the Scots underestimated the resilience and preparedness of the English defences. The battle reinforced England's dominance over Scotland during this period and secured the northern borders, contributing to the larger narrative of English victories in the early phases of the 100 Years' War. As a moment of both triumph and tragedy, Neville's Cross played a key role in shaping the future of Anglo-Scottish relations and the course of the war. Be sure to share your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe to Medieval Chronicles 1066 for more engaging content about the most transformative moments in medieval history. Stay curious.
Did you know that the wars between the Irish and the Vikings were not only epic, but also shaped the history of both regions in unforeseen ways? Welcome to Medieval Chronicles 1066. In this video, we will delve into the fascinating conflicts between the Irish and the Vikings, exploring the intense battles and complex relationships that define this era. From the initial Viking raids to the climactic Battle of Clontarf, these wars left an indelible mark on history. The clash between the Irish and the Vikings presented a unique challenge of cultures, strategies, and ambitions. The Vikings, hailing from Scandinavia, were known for their fierce raids and unparalleled seafaring skills. Beginning in the late 8th century, Viking longships appeared off the coast of Ireland, bringing with them warriors seeking wealth and new lands. The initial Viking raids were brutal and swift. They targeted monasteries, which were not only centers of religious life, but also repositories of wealth. For instance, the raid on the monastery of Lindisfarne in 793 AD is often cited as the beginning of the Viking Age, but it was soon followed by similar attacks on Irish monasteries such as Bangor and Clonmacnoise. The Irish, with their intricate clan system and deep knowledge of the terrain, found themselves at odds with these relentless invaders. The early Irish response was largely defensive, but over time, they adapted to the new threat. The Irish clans, each ruled by their own chieftains, had to overcome internal rivalries to present a united front against the Vikings. This was no small feat, as Ireland was not a unified kingdom but a patchwork of territories, each with its own leaders and interests. The challenge was not just about land. It was about power, resources, and survival. The Irish had to defend their way of life against a highly organized and often ruthless enemy. Viking raids disrupted the socio-political order in Ireland, compelling local rulers to devise new strategies for defense and retaliation. One of the key events in these conflicts was the Battle of Clontarf in 1014. But to understand Clontarf, we need to look at the years of Viking settlement and integration that preceded it. By the 9th century, the Vikings had established several significant settlements in Ireland, including Dublin, Waterford, and Limerick. These settlements were more than just military outposts. They became bustling centers of trade and cultural exchange. The Vikings introduced new technologies, such as shipbuilding techniques, and established trade routes that connected Ireland to a broader network spanning Europe and beyond. Dublin, founded in 841 AD, became one of the most important Viking towns, serving as a hub for trade and administration. Archaeological findings, such as those from the Wood Quay excavations, reveal a well-planned settlement with sophisticated craftsmanship and trade connections reaching as far as Byzantium and the Islamic world. The Vikings' influence on Irish society was profound. They brought with them new goods, crafts, and cultural practices. Irish society began to incorporate Viking elements, leading to a fusion of traditions. However, these settlements also became flashpoints for conflict as Irish kings sought to reclaim their territories from Viking control. The Vikings did not just settle and trade. They also played a role in Irish politics. Alliances were forged and broken as Irish kings and Viking leaders navigated the complex landscape of power. Some Irish rulers, like the legendary Brian Boru, sought to unite Ireland under their leadership and expel the Vikings. Brian Boru's rise to power was a significant turning point. As King of Munster, he expanded his influence and aimed to become the High King of Ireland. His military campaigns against both rival Irish kings and Viking lords were instrumental in consolidating his power. His ambition culminated in the Battle of Clontarf, a decisive confrontation that would determine the future of Viking presence in Ireland. The Battle of Clontarf was one of the most significant and bloody battles in Irish history. On Good Friday, April 23, 1014, Brian Boru's forces clashed with the Viking coalition near Dublin. The battle raged for hours, with fierce fighting on both sides. Brian Boru's strategy was to break the Viking ranks and exploit their weaknesses. Despite being an elderly man, Brian's leadership and tactical acumen were crucial. His forces managed to push the Viking coalition back, but the cost was high. Brian himself was killed, along with many of his allies and enemies. Contemporary accounts, such as the Annals of Ulster and the Cogad Gadal Rí Gálib, provide vivid descriptions of the battle. These sources highlight the heroism and brutality on both sides. The annals describe how the Irish forces, bolstered by allies from various regions, fought valiantly to repel the Viking invaders and their Irish allies, such as Mael Morda of Leinster. The aftermath of Clontarf was a turning point. Although Brian Boru was dead, his forces had effectively ended the Viking threat to Irish sovereignty. The battle marked the decline of Viking power in Ireland and the beginning of a new era for the Irish kingdoms. The legacy of Clontarf and the Viking Wars is seen in the transformation of Irish society. The integration of Viking trade networks into Irish life led to economic growth and cultural exchange. Viking art, craftsmanship, and administrative practices influenced Irish culture, resulting in a unique blend of styles and traditions. The political landscape also changed, as Irish leaders adopted some Viking methods to better manage their territories. In the years following Clontarf, Irish kings continued to vie for dominance, but the nature of their conflicts changed. The threat of Viking incursions diminished, allowing for a focus on internal consolidation and expansion. Viking settlers who remained in Ireland gradually assimilated into Irish society, contributing to the rich cultural tapestry of the island. To sum up, the Irish versus Viking Wars were not only epic in scale but also pivotal in shaping the history of both regions. These conflicts were marked by fierce battles, strategic alliances, and profound cultural exchanges. The impact of these wars can still be seen today in the rich tapestry of Irish history and culture. The Irish and Viking Wars highlight the dynamic interplay between invasion and adaptation, showing how conflict can lead to both destruction and cultural enrichment. The legacy of these wars is a testament to the resilience and ingenuity of the people involved, leaving a lasting influence on the historical trajectory of Ireland. If you found this exploration of the Irish versus Viking Wars intriguing, be sure to check out our other videos on historical conflicts and share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Medieval Chronicles 1066 for more fascinating history documentaries.